What's going on, San Antonio Spurs fans? Today we're going to be beginning our Southwest Division preview series, starting with the New Orleans Pelicans. And today we have a very special guest. We got editor-in-chief of the Birds, right? Oleh Kosel. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Noah. How are you, man?
I'm excellent. I'm excellent. The NBA season is right around the corner. There's a lot to be hopeful for. For every team, this is kind of like the point where everybody still thinks they can win it. So, as a Spurs fan, as somebody who writes about the Spurs, I guess I'm still holding out a little bit of hope for them.
How crazy is it that we go from, just crowning a champion, the Lakers, of course, in October, to all of a sudden you speed everything up, right? You have the draft, free agency, trades all in 1 week. Then, of course, training camp started this week. So, yeah, it's been a whirlwind, but it's fun. I'm just praying, Noah, for just one thing to get through the season, right? They're not going to be in the bubble this year, and I know we'll talk about this, but COVID, it's still hanging over our heads. We've
Yeah.
seen what it's done to other professional sports.
Exactly. Yeah, this is really, last season was unprecedented, but this one will be even more so because we really just don't know how everything's going to, pan out with COVID, with the teams, with a shortened schedule, with more back-to-backs, shorter layoff. Everything is just out of whack, really crazy. But let's just talk about the New Orleans Pelicans. We'll just go ahead and start off. So the first thing I want to know from you is, we've seen all these moves that they've made, and to me, they've had some, key additions, key losses. I see they added Steven Adams, and I want to talk about him first. So what do you think he brings to this team? I know some people are kind of worried that he hurts the spacing. How do you play him alongside Zion? What do you see or what do you think that you're going to get from a guy like Steven Adams?
I think he's a wonderful addition. I think once you hired Stan Van Gundy and you saw Derek Favors was really a shell of himself physically last year, right? We expected a totally different Favors. We expected Utah Favors, who was one of the best rim protectors, still mobile enough to give you a little bit of versatility on defense, provide some offense. It didn't happen. And so he actually missed some time due to injury. And of course, the sad, tragic passing of his mother. So his year was just absolutely destroyed. But when he was on the court again, he just didn't produce like we wanted to. So I knew the Pelicans had to find another center. And David Griffin landed one of the most, well-respected, most solid big men still in the NBA today. So with Steven Adams, I felt like the Pelicans had to grab somebody of his ilk. When you bring in Stan Van Gundy, what's he known for? Defense. And he's got to have an anchor he can rely on. Well, Adams provides you that. Everybody's watched OKC right over the years. You see what he's provided next to Durant and Westbrook. He does all the little things. He's the one that makes that defense go, right? He's the last line defense, and he does a great job. So being in the playoffs, 6 of the last 7 years, that I should say that's his career. That's not a bad sign. And of course, when you hear about what he brings off the court too, Pelicans are looking for leadership, Noah. Last year you kind of saw moments, but especially in the bubble where they were just hurting for, guidance. And they didn't bring the effort. Everybody, even David Griffin, the executive vice president will tell you, they were sorely disappointed in the type of effort level they showed there. So you need vets like Steven Adams to make sure it doesn't happen. So I think he's going to fit, like I said, with Stan Van Gundy, being able to basically build a defense around a really solid player. And of course, offensively, I think he's a little bit underrated. I think that's why I think he'll fit next to Zion. People talk about, oh, you need spacing here, everywhere, right? Small ball trends. That's not the case exactly with every team. When you have dynamic playmakers, they have that in Brandon Ingram, and they think they're going to have that in Zion. Because another way to create space with that three-point shot is through a lot of movement, setting screens. Well, guess what? Adams does that incredibly well. And Stan Van Gundy has a history of doing this. He did it with Andre Drummond up in Detroit. He put him up at the free throw line, the elbows, and he got a lot more motion out of them and really improved their offense. So I'm expecting the exact same thing here. Adams and Zion are not going to be competing on the post with one another for touches. That's just not going to how it's work. So, yeah, I think this is going to work. It's just going to be a little bit more unconventional when you just look at today's standards, right? Get one guy in the middle, surround him with 4 shooters. That's not what the Pelicans are aiming to do.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about that. People tend to make like a lot of the 3 ball, and you got to shoot a lot of them. You got to shoot them well. But you look at the Lakers; they finished last season 23rd in volume and 21st in efficiency, and they still won the championship pretty handily. I don't think it's as big of a deal, especially like you said, when you have dynamic playmakers, someone like Brandon Ingram, somebody like Zion Williamson. And I think that's exactly what you're going to get from Zion. I think Zion, obviously, he had some hiccups because he didn't get to play all year, right? He was still spectacular, but he didn't have that whole year to play out the whole season. I think he'll be even better next year, and hopefully he stays healthy. But I really like this Pelicans team, and I really love what Steven Adams adds to the mix. I think he's very underrated as a playmaker himself. He's a pretty good passer as far as big men go. And no, he's not going to be a great spacer, but I see him in a similar mold as I see Jakob Poeltl, who just got paid with the Spurs. Yes, he's not a shooter. Yes, he's not somebody who is going to space the floor like that, but he can pass well. He sets really great screens, and he's an intelligent player on both sides of the ball, somebody who's just a winner. And to me, he's a better leader than a lot of people give him credit for. So I'm really excited to see what he brings to New Orleans. And we'll talk about the other two guys. So Eric Bledsoe and Kyra Lewis. Let's start out with Eric Bledsoe. What do you make of him? I think that's kind of an interesting addition for the team.
He is an interesting one because he's slightly older than Drew Holiday. And David Griffin just told us that, Drew didn't exactly fit with the timeline here in New Orleans, but yeah, look, they flipped him for Eric Bledsoe, as you just mentioned. So it is interesting. But here's another important takeaway. People that are worried about spacing, literally Eric Bledsoe and Drew Holiday kind of provide the same thing for you, both on offense and defense. And they're definitely not good, renowned three-point shooters.
Yeah.
The Pelicans starting lineup last year of Lonzo Ball, Drew Holiday, Brandon Ingram, Zion Williamson, and Derek Favors, they had, I want to say it was a plus 12, some kind of really good net rating, right? They didn't play too many games together because of the injuries, but over, I think, about 20 games, they really impressed. The only two lopsided, failures, I guess, showings they had were against the Milwaukee Bucks, who everybody struggled with in the regular season, and the Lakers. So I feel like when you're basically substituting Favors with an improved version of what you thought you were getting Favors in Steven Adams, and you're kind of pretty much getting the same thing from Eric Bledsoe that was in Drew Holiday, then you're really not messing with anything that was successful last year. So I think with Bledsoe in particular, what I like about him is he's not as versatile of a defender as Drew Holiday, but what you do like about him is that he makes smarter decisions. Offensively, Drew, there were some months where he was just flat out incredible, but then there were also months where he would just disappear, Noah. And last year, to start the year, they relied on Drew big time to carry the load because Zion, missed the first 3 months or so. Derek was in and out. Lonzo was struggling to find his game. So really, it was just BI. But Drew, his offense just wasn't clicking. So the Pelicans had that 13-game losing streak. And that's kind of been the trend with him in his career, where the offense just comes and goes. He's just like that as a player, I guess. So replacing him with somebody that's a little more consistent in Eric Bledsoe, but he's also great at running pick and rolls. Not that Drew was bad. Drew was more of an isolation type. He can beat pretty much anybody off the dribble. But Bledsoe's more of a systems guy. And with Stan Van Gundy coming in, suddenly that free-flowing offenses of Alvin Gentry are gone. He's going to demand more like a discipline, responsibility, and just executing real sets. So I think Bledsoe fits that. And he understands that, hey, the two cornerstones on his team are Ingram and Zion. He's just looking to give you whatever you need. And like I said, he's got a well-rounded package. He could defend any guy that's relatively close to his height and size. And partnering with Lonzo Ball, people don't understand this, but it's going to make for a decent backcourt because Lonzo, if he can carry over that shooting we saw last year, he might be the Pelicans' best shooter. And, that's a scary thing to say, but from middle of December till the start of the pandemic, he had a catch and shoot percentage from three. No, I want to say it was around 43%, 42 on high volume, like 8 shots, or what was it? Yeah, about 8 shots per game, something along those lines. So you put that next to, those creators, Bledsoe, Ingram, and Zion. You don't need all of a sudden Lonzo to be taking drives to the rim. No, let him do what he does best, just spot up and shoot threes. But when you're in transition, Lonzo's going to be, of course, doing what he does well too, finding the open man. So I understand the Pelicans' reasoning, and it makes a lot of sense. So on paper, the starting lineup actually looks really good and is going to vie for really a playoff spot.
I think they will too, and I really like Lonzo, but I think I also saw him in the same kind of mold I saw Tyrese Halliburton coming out of college this year, where he's somebody who has been branded as a point guard, somebody's going to run your offense, but I think is honestly better being that secondary, tertiary creator where you don't have to put so much responsibility on him, but he's very dangerous in transition because of his vision, his athleticism, and then he's a guy who, you're right, he shot really well for a long stretch of last season, and we've seen him make improvements year after year. He's become a better shooter. That form has looked better. It's looked more disciplined. So I like what Lonzo can bring to that team, and he's a really underrated defender. I think he's one of the best guard defenders in the NBA. And that's not just because I'm talking to someone who writes about and talks about the Pelicans. I mean, I really do think that about Lonzo. So I think that's going to be a really interesting lineup. Now, a question I definitely had for you was about, Kyra Lewis. So do you think he's someone who could push Lonzo out of the lineup, or do you probably see him as somebody who's mostly going to come off the bench and maybe spot starter minutes, if somebody's out?
Yeah, no, I feel like we'll be lucky to see him in the first month, maybe two, if there's no injuries. Look, there's no summer league for these guys. They haven't played since the NCAA, was halted because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So no summer league, no legitimate training camp, no 6 to however 7, 8 preseason games. The Pelicans are only playing 2. So he is going to be basically dazed and confused, I think, right? Information overload for rookies is going to happen. So it's going to be tough to rely on even I think the best, right? They're all going to struggle, but Pelicans don't have to force to play this kid because they do have, as we've just talked about, Lonzo, Bledsoe. Off the bench, they've got Nikhil Alexander-Walker, Josh Hart, JJ Redick. So they've got, competent guards. Even Sindorius Thornwell. I'll throw his name in there too. So I just think Kyra is going to be allowed to come at his own pace, right? So Stan Van Gundy mentioned that in his introductory press conference, right? We were all excited. Hey, they drafted a legitimate point guard that, hey, he's fast. He's great. He looks like it could be a De'Aaron Fox lookalike clone kind of in the league. Well, good thing is, though, you don't have to rely on him because, look, he's not going to be ready. Nobody's expecting him to be ready, but it'll be great if he can pick up things quicker because you're right. Maybe he can crack the rotation, especially if an injury comes about because he's got skills. There's no doubt he's a three-pronged scorer. He can get in the men defensively. I mean, he's not the biggest guy. You want him to put on some weight first, right? Get some more size, but that's going to happen. It happens with almost any guard that comes kind of slight of frame into the NBA. But no, long-term, everybody likes him as a prospect.
Yeah, and I'm very high on him too. I scouted the entire 2020 class, and I had him ranked 10th on my big board. And I was pretty happy with that pick for the Pelicans. I thought, it makes sense. He doesn't have to start right away. He doesn't even necessarily have to play right away. And I think you're 100% right. It's going to be a huge transition period, obviously, for any rookie. But in a shortened offseason, without summer league, without training camps as long as they usually are, and then without as many preseason games as you usually get, it's going to be hard for them to learn the plays, get used to the system, the physicality of the league, the speed of the league. Everything is going to be different. So I do think he could break into that rotation, like you said, later. But I think with a lot of rookies, you're either going to see them, A, starting right away because teams are asking them to do that and they struggle, or B, they're going to kind of bring them along slower and then eventually integrate them into the system. But I really like that pickup for the Pelicans, even if they do, they don't necessarily need him right away. But I think he's a great long-term guy, 3-level scorer, somebody who can really just turn on the burners and he beats anybody. But I'm looking at the key losses now. So I'm looking Derek Favors, we talked about him, Drew Holiday. And I put Ja Okafor and Kenrick Williams in there. I'm not really, I don't think it's going to make a big difference for them, losing those guys. But Drew, we talked about a little bit earlier, but do you see Bledsoe as someone who is a little bit of a downgrade from Drew? I certainly do, but I'm not sure how much of a downgrade. Like, I don't think it's a significant one. Do you think it's one that is going to make a major impact on this team in a bad way? Or it's probably just going to be a little bit evened out, based on what they've already added to this roster?
I think long-term, you're right. It's not going to make much of a difference. I've already talked about how Drew, when he's on, he can really win you some games. People only have to look back a couple of years ago in the playoffs, what the Pelicans did to the Portland Trailblazers and sweeping them, right? What Drew specifically did defensively on Damian Lillard, on CJ McCollum, and on the offensive side, he was a better scorer than both of them. So you can get that Drew, then yes, all of a sudden that's an all NBA type of caliber player. But like I said, it's just fleeting moments that he plays like that. So over the entirety of the season, I just truly think Eric's going to be able to make up for it. The only thing that I do worry about, Noah, is Drew was able to guard a lot of small forwards. He was able to guard a lot of bigger guys. Suddenly, Eric Bledsoe can't do that. He majority of the time spends his time guarding point guards. Yeah. And I read what was on B-Ball Index. He does a great job. They gave him like a grade of an A when he's guarding guys basically of his stature. When he's had the guards shooting guards, which was a little less than half of the time, he did a lot more poorly, right? So I think that's cause for concern. That also goes to show you who's suddenly going to be that versatile defensive player that they can rely on in that starting lineup. And I hate to say it, but it's going to fall on Lonzo's shoulders. And you kind of mentioned it. Yeah, when Lonzo is engaged and when he's really focused, he can be a really good defender because his instincts are incredible. He's got good hands and he's got the size to really battle with people, but that was inconsistently seen last year. So it's going to be on him to really bring it this year because I don't think Brandon, for as long as he is, you think he could use those levers. He just doesn't have the strength. So unless he's gained and surprises, gains like 20 pounds over the offseason, you can't rely on him. And of course, Zion, right? He's just a bulkier guy. So it's going to fall on Lonzo. And that's what I'm worried about. The bigger threes in this league torched the Pelicans sometimes last year when Drew, right, didn't do as good of a job as everybody hoped. Now with him gone, boy, I feel like it might be open season because in free agency, they didn't pick up anybody. I was hoping for, Maurice Harkless, Jay Crowder. No, they didn't get anybody. Their best bet is Wenyen Gabriel, right? But he's more of a 4. I mean, I know he's got a little bit of athleticism, actually decent athleticism, but he's almost a rookie. He's 6'9". So again, I feel like they don't have a guy 6'6" to 6'8" that can guard opponents. So yeah, in that respects, Bledsoe is not going to be able to provide that for you. And suddenly, how does Stan Van Gundy, figure that little puzzle out? Because I certainly don't see it with the roster they've got.
Sure. And I think, even talking about Bledsoe, because you said they mentioned that Drew wasn't really on their timeline, I could see them trying to deal Bledsoe at the trade deadline, try to get another piece, because if he doesn't fit your timeline, then I don't think Bledsoe really does either. But I don't know who they would get for him. It's a kind of a similar conundrum that I have with the Spurs in terms of LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMar DeRozan. Yes, they can still get you about 20 points per game, but they don't really fit with the roster, right? They're not perfect fits. You probably could flip them for better pieces. You may want to get in the lottery again, or you may want to push for the playoffs. So I think they have an interesting roster. I'm just not sure what the Pelicans are going to do next season. Now, one of the other pieces that I think is really interesting, and you mentioned him, Brandon Ingram. I really would love to talk about him because he's a player who intrigues me, but I also think that sometimes the stats lie with him where, he does score a lot, but what does he bring outside of that and a little bit of playmaking? Because I think sometimes his decision-making is poor as a playmaker. Do you expect a bigger season from him next year, or do you think it's going to be kind of the same and he's going to play a similar role and we're going to see Zion take on that primary scorer role?
People are really excited, and a lot of it's emanating from the front office and from the coaching staff to where Brandon Ingram is probably going to be the Pelicans' most reliable playmaker this year. They brought in Steven Adams to basically set screens out there. So BI, this, he's not the fastest guy, can't get by a lot of players. So he has to rely on usually his length to get shots up over players or, somehow create that space, which he normally can't do off the dribble in isolation. So they're going to go into that more motion offense. It's going to open up more looks, but they also trust his playmaking instincts. And we saw there was a lot of games. No, I know what you're talking about. The inconsistencies were there, but there were a lot of also good, hopeful glimpses to where he had, consecutive games of 5, 6, 7 assists, and you saw his vision. I think the bigger problem for him last year was his handle was a little loose. He's a tall guy. His ball kind of tends to bounce off the floor a little bit too high. So opponents, smaller opponents, were swiping him, right, or bouncing off his legs. So that led to some problems. But no, I think that he's going to be able to take that next step. I heard he's been as committed as anybody this offseason. And when he walked out of the bubble, he turned to whoever was around him. I forget the exact story, but he basically said, this is the last time I'm ever missing the playoffs. So he's taken kind of that approach, I heard, this offseason to round out his game offensively, but especially defensively. He's told the coaches, tell me exactly what I need to do because you're right. I didn't bring it defensively last year. He wants to do that this year, lead by example. So, if things work out, I could see him in the running, honestly, for maybe an all-NBA third-team selection. The Pelicans make the playoffs, and Zion, of course, isn't all-world yet. I mean, he's going to get there soon, I think. He's a generational talent, but I don't think it's Zion's time exactly yet. So if they do make noise, it's going to be Brandon. And so look for him to possibly get the accolades to go with it.
That's interesting to me because I talk to some people about this sometimes, and I think some players get the opportunity to be that one, A1 type of option, right, where they pretty much have the green light every time down, but sometimes they're miscast in that role, right? So I think for a long time we saw Devin Booker kind of miscast in that role where he needs to have the ball in his hands all the time and be scoring a ton to win games. And now that they have kind of surrounded him with a better supporting cast, I better buy into that role. And then when I look at Brandon Ingram and his supporting cast, it's not that it is not a good supporting cast, because anytime you have Zion Williamson and Eric Bledsoe and Steven Adams out there with you, that's a good supporting cast. But I worry about, is he the right number one option for your team? And I really like what Zion brings to the table, but I think you could be right there that maybe it's not his time yet, because really we did see, what was it? You can tell me the exact amount of games, but I think it was about 15 or 20 from Zion as a rookie.
24, 19 before the bubble. So
okay.
Not a lot.
Yes, not a ton of games from him. So I liked what I saw from him. I want to see more from him. But I do think down the road, you're probably going to be looking at, this is Zion's team more than it is Brandon Ingram's team. But I would love to see, Ingram improve, because I think he is someone who I've been very high on since he was at Duke. And I think a lot of fans got too caught up with, well, he's the second pick. Why isn't he producing right away? And, maybe 2 decades ago, if you were the number 2 pick, you probably spent 2 or 3 years in college, and he just had that one and done. That is such a big trend of the one and done, that people want that immediate gratification of that pick panning out, being an all-star right away. And that just isn't really the case with all these guys. And a lot of them get drafted based on potential. They're drafted based on potential. They're not going to fulfill that right away. So he's a case of a guy who I liked, because I see, okay, well, I liked him coming out of college, and he's finally proving me right that he was better than people said his rookie year. So I'm excited. That's really good to hear. That's awesome to hear.
I'm curious, did you like him more than Ben Simmons? Because I actually picked him ahead of Ben Simmons as who I would want long-term.
So I like
that was not the majority opinion, if you remember, right?
I do, yeah. No, I actually liked Ben Simmons more, just because I saw, to me, he had this like generational vision, sort of like LeBron James. He could get anywhere he wanted on the court. But for me, my deal with him was like, if he develops a jump shot, then he could be basically like a LeBron James 2.0, and he just hasn't. He just has not done that. He's kind of capped his value, and I want to see him get better. But I think if I had to pick between him and Ben Simmons at this point, it would still be Ben, because they're just so young. But if you give me 2 years down the road and Ben still isn't shooting well, I think I have to go with Brandon Ingram, because I just think that valuable a scorer, that a guy who can potentially be a really good number 2 option, elite number 2 option, you got to take him. But for now, I still am on Ben Simmons' side. I just also think he has a very awkward situation in Philadelphia. It's a very odd roster construction. They're definitely working on it. They definitely worked on it this offseason, but it's very odd. And I want to move on to another young guy who's on the Pelicans. So I really like Jackson Hayes out of Texas from a year ago. What do you think about him? What is his role now? Because I thought they may be letting Favors walk so that he could be the starter. But to me, it seems that he'll probably still be the backup. And after what I saw from him last year, I think that's probably a good role for him, at least right now.
Absolutely. Jackson Hayes is a long-term project. Last year, he wasn't even supposed to play. David Griffin told us on media day a year ago that he is going to basically go through a red shirt season.
Oh, wow.
That's how raw he was. That's how much they knew that this kid not only doesn't know the game well enough, his body wasn't ready, right? And you saw that last year. He was getting pushed around by, small forwards and stuff. So he was consistently out of position defensively. He wasn't able to battle on the boards like he liked. But, hey, he produced highlights. I mean, I don't know how many dunks this kid has been played on ESPN SportsCenter and stuff, but it's been quite a few. I mean, JJ Redick has a couple of times just been blown away in awe, and I remember him telling us about it. So, no, Jackson Hayes has the talent. He's just, like I said, I mean, he's got to put on even more weight. I want to say about 20, 25 pounds. I've heard that he's added some over the offseason, but again, when you also watch the kid play, he honestly doesn't grasp even the most basic fundamentals, right? On how to cover pick and rolls, where he needs to be to supply that help weak side defense as a 5, all sorts of stuff. So I just think, bringing in Adams makes sense, because I don't think Hayes would have been ready for at least another couple of years. So it makes sense. But for now, he provides a very good, important role as an energy big. Kind of like Miles Plumlee, kind of like some other backup centers around the league. Sure. He can come in and change the momentum of the game for you by making one of those special dunks, a block here or there. So I think that's going to be his role probably for at least this year, probably next too. But yeah, they're high on him. They drafted him 8th. They thought they were getting a guy that could potentially play next to Zion one day because they think he's got the touch to expand his shot out to the 3-point line. You can definitely see it on his free throws, right? He's got a very good soft touch.
Yeah.
He just has to, like I said, develop some confidence and just basketball savviness, right? But that takes time. So no, I think just long term, it makes sense. But for now, fans shouldn't get upset. A lot of fans were upset by his year last year because, of course, he didn't produce, or when he was out there, he was just looking lost, basically. So just got to give him time. I think the Pelicans are going to practice patience because they brought him in along with Zion, Nikhil Alexander-Walker, looking to basically create a core. Griffin's always referred to this as, I want to kind of mimic what Golden State Warriors did, right? When they brought in Curry, Thompson, Green, and several other less popular guys at the time. But they built a core from roughly the same draft class or two. And so that's Griffin's vision. So I'm sure he hasn't, lost hope or faith in Jackson just because Adams was brought in.
Yeah, I wouldn't either because, again, we talked about this a second ago, but I think fans are so ready for these players to be just out of the box, go, go, go. And it just doesn't happen that way a lot of times, especially with a lot of these guys who get picked early based on potential. And he kind of reminds me of Jared Allen, another Texas product who wasn't really ready to play in the NBA from day one, but he was kind of forced into that role because he was part of a sorry Nets team. And he's kind of, evolved into a pretty good NBA player. Like, I don't necessarily think he's
underrated,
but I do think he's a spot starter or at least a serviceable backup. So I really like him. And I think Hayes probably has more potential. I think he's a little more athletic. He's definitely longer, has a little bit better shooting touch. So I'm excited to see what they can do with him in the next couple of years. And you mentioned Nikhil Alexander-Walker. I don't actually know all that much about him. I wasn't super familiar with him. What can you tell me about him? Is he somebody who the coaching staff is excited about, or is he someone who plan is going to be in the plans this year, or is he a long-term guy?
Yeah, so he's his cousin's Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, for those people that don't know, both from Canada. Trajan Langdon loves him. He's the Pelicans GM, so he's right below David Griffin, but he scouted him heavily, and he told us, look, if Nikhil knew how much I watched him at Virginia Tech, then he would have probably had me, call the police on me for stalking, right? So he really eyeballed him. He likes what he sees. And what he sees basically is a guy that can play point guard, but really play positions 1 through 3, but point guard at standing 6'6", right? He's got a really great standstill kind of a catch and shoot shot. And we saw that last year. He was one of the better rookies shooting the 3 ball on catch and shoot situations. But for him, it's all about just learning the game and the speed, as you've mentioned. In summer league, he blew the doors off. In preseason, he killed it again. Yeah. So people are expecting big things last year, but guess what? The regular season's a different animal. And it really hurt him that he wasn't physically strong enough to get to the rim. He was not making correct reads. So he was turning the ball over a lot. So his playing time became real inconsistent. So, of course, Alvin Gentry turned to Frank Jackson, E'Twaun Moore, several others. So he dropped on the depth chart. So his development took a little bit of a hit because of that inconsistency. But from what I hear amongst the players in the practice facility, this kid really wants to be a good player. He supposedly latched on to J.J. Redick last year and basically rode his coattails, exactly trying to follow what he does in practice, trying to mimic his routines, develop his own routines. So I've got a lot of hope, actually more so maybe for him than Jackson Hayes, because we've seen the glimpses of where you can see how this kid's going to fit in this modern NBA. And I think he's going to be given at least a chance to play into a decent-sized role off the bench for the Pelicans this year. Because besides Bledsoe and Lonzo Ball, you're not, like I said, they're not going to be able to rely on Lewis. So it's going to have to be Nikhil. He's going to be basically the third-string point guard. So he's already got some responsibility on his shoulders, but I think they know he's ready for it because they haven't made any other moves to kind of shore up that position. So I think he's going to be given a chance, and he may surprise. Because like I said, we've seen the glimpses out of him, and he's got all the potential in the world. The game just had to basically slow down for him. He just had to learn schemes, strategies, and get stronger. From what I've heard, he's done that.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I like I said, I didn't really know too much about him, like in terms of his season's production. I didn't watch a ton of Pelicans basketball outside of, the games here or there when they played the Spurs. So that's great to hear because if you're following J.J. Redick, one of the all-time great shooters, great work ethic, great guy, I think you're setting yourself up for success. And, if you're somebody like Nikhil Alexander-Walker, who even going back to college definitely showed some potential to play multiple positions. To me, that just is going to be so good for his development. And then the last guy of all the young guys, of course, we've talked about him a little bit, but Zion Williamson. I mean, that's the guy who everybody wants to talk about, everybody wants to hear about. I've watched a ton of him going back to, high school, even during his Duke days. And I tried to watch him as much as I could. And he made his debut against the Spurs, where he made, I think, like 5 threes and then didn't make any for like months. To me, he's a guy who, if he's able to put it all together and they can get a roster around him that complements him, he could be, to me, a future MVP candidate kind of player. Do you think we're going to see a big jump from year 1 to year 2? Or do you think we're probably going to see more like consistency? We're going to see the same numbers, but we're going to see it over an entire season.
Yeah, that's a great question. Coming into training camp, before I learned anything, I would have gone with the second bet, to where you're just going to see more consistency out of him, expand his game a little bit more, become a bigger playmaker, a little better defensively. But now, with the way the Pelicans have structured the roster, they basically, I mean, outside of Adams and Bledsoe and JJ Redick, they have no veterans. This is without a doubt now Zion's and NBI's team. So I truly think that by giving him the reins, and supposedly, we always hear the off-season stories, how hard a player works, but I've seen pictures. And so if he can come into training camp with that weight off, that was something he struggled with. People got to understand he was nowhere close to an optimal playing weight, both before the pandemic and in the bubble. So if he is 15, 20 pounds lighter, I think that's going to open up the world to him, to where, he's not only going to be able to do more things on the court, he's going to be able to stay on the court longer, because people were worried about, I should say, not people, the physical training staff was worried about his conditioning level. They monitored it so closely. That's why we had the headaches of the bursts and the limitations and restrictions and you name it on him. So if that conditioning has been, basically taken to an elite professional athlete level, and I think we're going to be in for kind of a surprise, to where, wow, Zion suddenly is going to resemble the guy we saw at Duke. Because that's what we didn't see, right? We saw a lot of athleticism and highlights, but we didn't see the blocks. We didn't see the steals. We didn't see him grab the bull by the horns and either try and break opponents down from the perimeter, transition, get to the rim, find others like he did at Duke. So I think there's a good chance we may see that guy this year. And if that's the case, then yeah, I think we're in for a bigger jump than just like, say, consistency being reflected in the numbers. I think there might be a jump coming in the numbers because of that.
And do you think with this roster, just as it is constructed right now, that they have a chance to make some noise in the playoffs? And where do you think they might finish in the Western Conference in terms of like the seeding?
I think they're a play-in tournament candidate for sure. We know injuries here in New Orleans, like few other teams.
Yeah.
Somebody always gets hit with them. There's always those bad, not just weeks, months at a time. So it really derails a whole season for the team. And you saw that last year, right? So I think Vegas has them roughly at around 35 wins, right? 34 and a half, 35 and a half somewhere. And I think that's a good bet, right? That's about the 9th seed in the Western Conference right now.
Yeah.
And I think that's great. If they exceed it, everybody stays healthy, we see the improvement that you and I are now talking about, then sure, they'll win more, probably climb maybe as high as, say, a 7th seed. But if it doesn't, of course, they're going to be struggling just to get in that 9th or 10th slot. So I think we've learned here in New Orleans, like I said, longtime fans, don't count your chickens, because they haven't hatched ever, seemingly.
Yeah, I totally get that. And Vegas has the Spurs, I think, for 28 and a half wins. I'm not all that surprised about that. I try to be a little bit more realistic when I look at the roster. And like last year, I thought, there's a chance they make the playoffs, but probably as like a 7th or 8th seed. Of course, they missed the playoffs. And this year, I'm looking at this roster. They lost Marco Bellinelli. They lost Bryn Forbes. But to me, those are kind of addition by subtraction. They were 2 of the worst perimeter defenders in the NBA by the numbers last year. And if you watched any games, teams were absolutely targeting them every single time down. And what made it worse was they played together a lot. So it only compounded defensive issues for a team that has traditionally been very, very stingy under Greg Popovich. So I think when I'm looking at the Spurs, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to ask every single person I do the Southwest Division preview with, is where do you see them stacking up with the Spurs? Like if they played the Spurs tomorrow, do you like their chances to win, or do you think it's a tough matchup for them?
think it's a tough matchup. I think anytime you go up against a Greg Popovich team, you're in for, a well-coached team that is going to game plan you and know how to basically expose your holes, right? We saw Greg Popovich do that in Zion's debut, to where I think he only had a bucket in the entire first half. He didn't go off to score those 4 threes in a row and was 17, 18 points in the 3.5 minute stretch until, late in the third quarter, once Alvin Gentry kind of figured out how to get him the ball, because Popovich had him played perfectly the way he was even catching the ball in the spot. So again, I think Popovich is, and he's still got veterans, right? He's got DeRozan, he's got Aldridge, Pirtle, White, Murray, who, boy, I think if you get Murray a full season alongside White, I think they're an underrated kind of backcourt in the league. So I actually like the Spurs, and I don't agree with what Las Vegas is saying. I think they're more of a 33 win team.
Yeah.
And they're going to be there fighting for a 9th or 10th seed. I really believe that. Especially think about this: if they get one of their bigger wings, like Lonnie Walker, maybe Devin Vassell is able to contribute a little bit faster. I could really see them surprise some people.
Yeah, and I think they might have the capacity to surprise some people. My concern with them is the depth of the Western Conference. It is so deep this year, and I know that's kind of a tired tale. The West is deep, but the West is especially deep this season. And I worry when I look at how they constructed the roster, right? I'm glad that Marco and Brent are gone. That kind of erases some huge defensive liabilities. But you lose a little bit of three-point shooting, and obviously the volume and the efficiency can be substituted elsewhere. But to me, you lose a little bit of the dynamic shot-making ability of those two. So, they're shooting off movement, they're running off screens. They can shoot a little bit off the dribble. Their gravity is greater than that of somebody like Alani or Keldon or even Derek or DeJounte. But I'm very encouraged to see, or excited, I guess, to see what they do this offseason, because every offseason, pretty much for every single one of these guys, whether it be Derek, DeJounte, Lonnie, Keldon, we've seen them get better every offseason. And Derek and DeJounte didn't get to play a lot last season. And I think they could be a really dangerous defensive lineup. Derek led all guards and blocks last season. He also was second in the NBA in charges drawn. I think he's a super underrated defender. Still kind of salty that Luka Doncic got an all NBA or all defense vote over him. And then, we know that DeJounte is the youngest all NBA defender in league history. So to me, that's a really dangerous combo. If they can continue to build some chemistry, I like what they have there. I just think the Spurs should consider moving on from LaMarcus or DeRozan, or even both, because I think you're in this gray area like the Magic, where you're maybe competing for an 8th or 7th seed just to be a first-round exit, and then you get in this kind of basketball purgatory where you're not really getting a top talent in the draft, but you're also not really getting, if you're in the lottery, you're not getting a good talent there either. So I'd like to see them figure out what they want to do, because it looks like they're moving in a certain direction, but I want to see them commit all the way, if you know what I mean. I want to see them commit, and that's kind of what I like about the Pelicans here, is because I feel like they've committed to building this team around Brandon Ingram and Zion. And clearly the Spurs don't have that guy yet, but I want to see them commit to some sort of movement. That's kind of my big issue with this team. I want to see a commitment to, a direction, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's just hard to tell Greg Popovich, hey, you're tanking for a year or two, right? I mean, I can't see that going over well at all for him. Besides, he could get almost anybody, feel like a team of 15 scrubs to, put up a decent, respectable performance. So, yeah, it'll be interesting for me. But I think you're absolutely right. They've got to move at least one of those two, get something for them, dedicate to a build. And if any year you kind of want to take off, this draft, I feel like the top 7 or 8 guys can legitimately be true number ones in a lot of other drafts. So this is a year where you kind of, if you want to find that talent you're talking about the Spurs need, this is a draft to do it in.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I told you, I scouted the 2020 class. I'm doing the same for the 2021 class. I watched a lot of these guys going back to high school. Some of these guys are from the DFW area, which is where I live. So I've seen them in person. Really like all of them, especially the top 7, 8. Like, I think a lot of people, or for casual fans, they don't understand that this draft that just happened, everyone who went top 10 in this draft would not go top 10 next year. No one would. Absolutely no one would, at least by my board and by a lot of other people's boards. So This draft is absolutely stacked. Cade Cunningham, Zaire Williams, you got a BJ Boston in there. You've got a guy even like a Scotty Barnes, who's like the 10th best guy, who might have been number 2 or 3 this year. So I really like this class. And what I'm telling Spurs fans right now, at least, I'm trying to get them on board with this idea that not tank, don't be intentionally bad, But if
Right.
you move on from older guys and you get Greg Popovich doing something similar that he had in the bubble last year, where he went, okay, we're going young, we're going to run and gun, we're going to do pace and space. It worked for them in the bubble. They went 5-3. They could have very well gone 7-1 if not for a goaltending call, and they just sat out pretty much everybody in the last game against the Jazz. I think you could have a competitive team, and if you don't make the playoffs, you do get a lottery pick, you can add one of those guys to the mix, And to me, you can't keep every single one of your picks, right? You've got Lonnie, you've got Keldon, you've got Luka Šamanić, you've got Derek and DeJounte. Someone's got to go. They can't all stay. So if there was a year to at least hand the reins over to the young guys, let them play their hearts out, gain that valuable experience, learn something from a coach who is a legend in his sport, this would be the year. And then if you say you get the 8th or 9th pick, you could probably package that with one of them to move up a few spots, get the guy who you like. And if you get lucky, you end up getting Kate Cunningham. If you end up by some miracle, you
The
get
guy I want
Cunningham,
to. Yeah,
and that's your
he's
guy
good.
set for a while. But that's just kind of the train I'm trying to get Spurs fans on, because right now I actually did a poll on Twitter where I said, would you rather them win the 2021 lottery or make the playoffs in 2021? And it was a 51-49 split. So it's like, it seems the fan base is just half and half. There was about 4,000 votes, which to me is pretty significant chunk of people. So it just, I don't know. To me, you don't want to be that 8th or 7th seed in the playoffs when you don't have your guy, right? If you have your guy like a Luka or Zion, or even like a Jason Tatum or something, if you're the 8th seed and you lose, but you're going to be better even next year, that's fine. But if you don't have your guy, then you're just losing in the playoffs to be someone else's entertainment. And I just can't fly with that. So, God, I can't even think about what would happen if they made the playoffs by keeping DeMar and LaMarcus, and then you get bounced, and then somehow they sign an extension. It's a lot for me to think about, but I think one of the last things I wanted to ask you before I let you go is I have this Southwest Division power rankings. So for me, I have them 1 Mavericks, 2 Rockets, 3 Pelicans, 4 Grizzlies, and 5 Spurs. What would your power rankings for this division look like?
I feel like we can't even answer that question because of what's going on in Houston, right? I
Yeah.
know that nobody's likely to get traded in the next week or two, but I feel like they're destined to move either off of Harden or Westbrook by the deadline. And so if that's coming, the team's not going to play well, even when they're on the court. But once one of them gets moved, boy, I think things can really fall apart. I mean, they lost Covington. I feel like if they truly wanted to legitimately make another run in the playoffs, they would have kept him, maybe added some pieces to what they had that worked last year, but they didn't. Austin Rivers moved on. He was kind of serviceable for them off the bench. Yeah, I mean, I have no hope for them. So putting them number 2 is interesting because, with Harden and Westbrook, you think that's a shoo-in, but I don't foresee that team finishing this season together with those 2 guys. So therefore, I'm going to knock them down. I'm going to say, of course, the Mavericks 1. And then it's going to be Pelicans, Grizzlies, and then I'm putting the Rockets below them because I think at some point they're going to hit a wall and they're going to go on some crazy losing streak because the season's going to be upended for them. So maybe even the Spurs finish ahead of them. I'm not sure, but the Rockets, they're the ones that are going to move up or down this list. I think for everybody else you got, they're in right positions, right? One sitting above the other.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree with you there. I have the Rockets just kind of number 2 because that's how they look to me right now. I don't expect them to finish the season that way. Just seems like something's got to happen, right? It has the same sort of feeling to me like it did with Kawhi and the Spurs, and obviously not the same scenario, but where you're like, something's got to happen. Because if it doesn't, something's going to implode. It's going to end badly. So I can't help but feel like it's going to end that way. And then the Grizzlies, I like them. I actually kind of think they could be right on par with the Pelicans or better, but they're missing, Triple J. They're missing Jaren Jackson Jr. for the first, I think, month or so of the season or 2. So I don't know how that team operates without him. I think he's really important for them. So I guess we'll just have to see. It's going to be a crazy season, really, regardless of what team you're rooting for, what team you write about, what team you watch. It's just going to be something that everybody's got to stay tuned for.
Yeah, let's just hope we can get through it. Like we mentioned at the top of the show, right? COVID. I mean, that's what I'm worried about. Most teams endure some really bad injury seasons. On top of that, this year, who's going to be the unlucky teams with the COVID, right? Where you say have to sit down a couple of key guys in consecutive weeks or something along those lines. And suddenly you go through 8 straight losses as to where other teams, Say they don't have that COVID hit on a star. Suddenly they're going to look that much better in a kind of a shortened season, right? 72 games. So I think that's going to be a big factor that people aren't talking about enough yet.
Definitely, definitely. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I'll just ask you, do you have any final thoughts about the Pelicans or Spurs? And if you don't, where can people find where you write, talk, your social media, anything you want to plug? You can go ahead and just throw it all out there.
Yeah, you can catch us over at SB Nation, right? The Bird Writes. It's all one word, www.thebirdwrites.com. And you can follow us on the same Twitter handle, both on Twitter and Facebook, actually. Or you can follow me at Oleh Kosel, my full name, OLEH'Kosel.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you, Spurs fans, for tuning in. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification button if you want to see when the next video is dropping. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you like, who you want to see, what you want to talk about. And until next time, take care, guys.